It is so important to seek guidance from God before making major decisions in our lives, because situations are not always what they appear to be.
This is Mission 66, your daily connection to the Bible brought to life. Join John Matthews and Esther Sisulu as they explore the book of Joshua, uncovering courage, faith, and God's promises. In partnership with Dr. Luis Sayao and TWR, we guide you chapter by chapter. Grab your study guide at mission66.org and follow along. Here's Esther to introduce today's topic.
Welcome back, dear friends. So excited to be with you here on Mission 66. Today we're studying the Old Testament book of Joshua. And what we've learned of him so far is that he was the general that led the Israelite army into the land of Canaan. That was about 1,100 years before Christ. And today, our teacher, John Matthews, will take us through chapters 8 and 9 with the theme, Victory and Deceit.
Well, a very warm welcome to Mission 66. Great to have your company, as always. So here we are on Mission 66, looking close, or the Israelites are looking close to conquering the promised land. And we're going to see in the book of Joshua this clear and simple organization of facts. Joshua here is called forth in the first chapter of the book. And then in verse 10 of the first chapter, they enter the land. And in chapter 8, the Bible tells us about the destruction of the city of Ai, spelled A-I. In chapter 9, then we see the agreement between Joshua and the Gibeonites. And verse 1 of chapter 8 says, "Then the Lord said to Joshua, 'Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai. For I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. You shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king, except that you may carry off their plunder and livestock for yourselves. Set an ambush behind the city.'" Well, here we have the battle plan given by God. And as we saw in chapter 7, there'd been an unsuccessful attempt to conquer the city of Ai, which was... Well, it wasn't an exceptionally notable city, but because of Achan's sin, Israel had lost that battle. Now, once this sin had been resolved, God is then commanding Joshua to continue attacking and head off to conquer the city of Ai again. And so about 30,000 of his best warriors depart for the city, and they prepare this ambush, a trap, to deceive the inhabitants of Ai and then conquer the city. So they decide to move on and attack the city, but the entire army advances along with Joshua, and they decide to camp north of the city of Ai. But Joshua then leaves 5,000 men to create this ambush, and these men are posted west of the city near the region of Bethel. So the king of Ai looks up and he sees these 5,000 men west of the city and thinks, "My goodness, we've defeated them once. How easy it's going to be to defeat Israel again." And so he decides in confidence to march against them. But while he attacks the 5,000 part of the army, the other 25,000 who are hidden by this ambush are able to conquer the city from the other side. And verse 18 says, "Then the Lord said to Joshua, 'Hold out toward Ai the javelin that is in your hand, for into your hand I will deliver the city.' So Joshua held out toward the city the javelin that was in his hand, and as soon as he did that, the men in the ambush rose quickly from their position and rushed forward. They entered the city, capturing it, and quickly set it on fire. The men of Ai looked back, and they saw the smoke of the city rising up into the sky, but they had no chance to escape in any direction. And the Israelites who'd been fleeing toward the wilderness turned back against their pursuers. For when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city and that smoke was going up from it, they turned around and attacked the men of Ai. Those in the ambush also came out of the city against them, so that they were caught in the middle, with Israelites now on both sides. Israel cut them down, leaving them neither survivors nor fugitives. But they took the king of Ai alive and brought him to Joshua. And so we see here this elaborate strategy, attracting the soldiers to one side whilst an ambush takes over the city from the opposite side. So they basically make a sandwich with the men of Ai stuck in the middle, and they conquer the city as God had promised them. And with this, they reach Mount Ebal, and Joshua is going to renew the covenant with God on Mount Ebal. And the Bible says, then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. He built it according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool had been used. On it they offered to the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. There, in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua wrote on stones a copy of the law of Moses. And all the Israelites with their elders, officials and judges were standing on both sides of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, facing the Levitical priests who carried it. Both the foreigners living among them and the native-born were there. Half of the people stood in front of Mount Gerizim and half in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had formerly commanded when he gave instructions to bless the people of Israel. Afterward, Joshua read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curses, just as it is written in the book of the law. So the covenant is reinforced after this great victory. But perhaps surprisingly, more problems arise. Everyone knew of the victories of the Israelites. And verse 3 of chapter 9 tells us what happens next. It says, however, when the people of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to a ruse. They went as a delegation whose donkeys were loaded with worn-out sacks and old wineskins, cracked and mended. They put worn and patched sandals on their feet, and they wore old clothes. What's going on here, you ask? All the bread of their food supply was dry and mouldy. Then they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and the Israelites, we have come from a distant country. Make a treaty with us. And the Israelites said to the Hivites, but perhaps you live near us, so how can we make a treaty with you? We are your servants, they said to Joshua. Joshua then wanted to know, who are you and where did you come from? And they decide to deceive Joshua, and they say that they have come from far away and that they knew of the great victories that Israel had had. And we can basically say that their story was well told because Joshua believed them. He was completely deceived. He even said to them, this bread of ours was warm when we packed it at home on the day we left to come to you, but Now see how dry and mouldy it is. These wineskins were filled with new wine, but now see how cracked they are. Our clothes and sandals are worn out by the very long journey. And the Israelites sampled their provisions, but pay attention here. They did not inquire of the Lord. They were in danger of being deceived. And the plan and the story was elaborate, and so was the evidence. And so, rather than inquire of the Lord, Joshua hastily makes a treaty of peace with them to let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratify that treaty by oath. But these are the Gibeonites. They've not come from far away, as they had told Joshua. They lived close to the Israelites, and they're preparing a trap, deceiving Joshua and indeed the entire people of Israel, so that they could be preserved, so that they would not be destroyed, so that they will be able to escape with their lives without being conquered like the rest of the Canaanites. But look at what happens next. It says, 3 days after they made the treaty with the Gibeonites, the Israelites heard that they were neighbors living near them. So the Israelites set out, and on the 3rd day they came to their cities, Gibeon, Kephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. But the Israelites did not attack them, because the leaders of the assembly had sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Just see and observe what's happening here, the major confusion the Israelites are needlessly getting themselves into, not following the simple instruction of God, but following and being deceived by the nations around them. And the people of Israel here, we see, are beginning to learn a hard truth. When they understand the word of God and the guidance of God, they are victorious and blessed. But when they decide to head in another direction and don't seek God for guidance, basing their decisions on their own wisdom, on other factors around them, on what their eyes are seeing and telling them in the moment, then they allow themselves to fall deep into trouble. And the chapter goes on to say, the whole assembly grumbled against the leaders, but all the leaders answered, we have given them an oath, our oath, by the Lord, the God of Israel, and so we cannot touch them now. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live, so that God's wrath will not fall on us for breaking the oath we swore to them. They continued, let them live, but let them be woodcutters and water carriers in the service of the whole assembly. And so the leaders' promise to them was kept. Then Joshua summoned the Gibeonites, and he said, why did you deceive us by saying we live a long way from you, while actually you live near us? You are now under a curse. You will never be released from service as woodcutters and water carriers for the house of my God. And they answered Joshua, your servants were clearly told how the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you the whole land and to wipe out all its inhabitants from before you. So we feared for our lives because of you, and that is why we did this. We are now in your hands. Do to us whatever seems good and right to you. So Joshua saved them from the Israelites, and they did not kill them. And that day he made the Gibeonites woodcutters and water carriers for the whole assembly to provide for the needs of the altar of the Lord at the place the Lord would choose. And that ends the chapter. It says, is what they are to this day. Interesting, isn't it, dear listeners, to see what was apparently a small problem in the end has major consequences. Joshua does not seek the Lord for guidance, decides to act rashly, impulsively, without thinking. He makes this promise in the name of the Lord. He makes a deal, a sort of covenant, a treaty with the Gibeonites. And that treaty means, contrary to what God had asked them to do, the Gibeonites, as the Canaanites, were now able to live among the people of Israel. And that would prove to be a terrible influence among the people. And the Israelites, before long, would soon be following the false gods of these people. The people of Israel didn't obey God as they should have. They didn't eliminate the Canaanites completely, and now they find themselves in this new, unplanned covenant, having a treaty signed as a result of this rash decision. And unfortunately, we're going to see how this turns into a major problem. It turns into a trap that was set for the people of Israel as a result of their disobedience.
This is Mission 66, and we're taking you through all 66 books of the Bible, a chapter at a time. And I'm Esther, your host, and of course I have some discussion questions for our teacher, John Matthews. Now, John, first up in the list of questions, when Joshua found out that the Gibeonites had purposely deceived them, why couldn't he have just killed them there and then for being the liars that they were?
I thought you said in the last episode that was really harsh.
Look, at this point, we need to explore all the options. It was harsh. But in this case, why didn't it happen?
Yes, okay. No, I see where you're coming from. Well, you know, this was because of the oath, and it just shows how important promises are. And Joshua had taken this oath, and he had promised to let them live. And, you know, even though he'd made the promise as a result of the Gibeonites' falsehood, effectively, God was still going to hold the Israelites to that promise. And yeah, you know, it turned out to be a mistake, but it was a promise which God required them to honor anyway, because they had made a promise. And so later we'll actually find out how King Saul killed some Gibeonites in violation of Joshua's oath to them, and the Lord held it against Israel, even though that was a generation later in the days of King David.
Yeah, this really goes to show how serious this matter is.
Yeah, it does show how serious it is, Esther. And look, it's just a reminder that we need guidance from God, and always, let's not sometimes be afraid of silence when we're talking to people, and we may be tempted to fill that silence with words that aren't real, or promises that aren't real. So it's important to just be very careful about what comes out of our mouths, the words that come out of our mouths.
Yeah, to count every word, in fact, that we speak.
Yeah.
So here's another one. In chapter 8, verse 2, you know, the people were actually allowed to take the spoils from Ai. But we saw previously in the last episode that at the Battle of Jericho, they weren't allowed to. So what were the circumstances here? What changed?
Yeah, it's a good spot, Esther. And you're right as well, because when Israel conquered Ai, God gave them permission to take the spoils of war this time. But as you say, not at Jericho. It was because Jericho was considered the first fruits of Israel's occupation in the Promised Land after those 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. These first fruits, well, they signified something. They were important. God required everything in that city to be turned over to him as a first fruits offering, believing that there were indeed more victories to come. And if Poor old Achan could have only waited and not took what was devoted to God at Jericho. He would have had more than enough plunder from Ai. And there's a lesson there, isn't there?
Yeah, there is.
When we wait, God provides more than we can imagine. But when we try sometimes to take control and force the issue and go too soon, we can end up getting lost and confused. And it sometimes takes a while, I think, sometimes for God to say, look, I'm here, very often in the silence, waiting to be intimate with you and show you the way to go. But we rush ahead so often, don't we?
Oh, yeah, we do. And I can attest about that in my own life as well. And so it's important to wait on the Lord. Now, as we continue and look towards the end of chapter 8 now, there seem to be these foreigners that are among the people of Israel. And I might be mistaken here, but weren't all foreigners a threat to the people of Israel?
No, they weren't, because even when the Israelites had left Egypt 40 years before, there were a lot of Egyptians who went with them, largely because they had seen how God had taken care of those that he was in covenant with, and they wanted to be a part of it. In ancient Israel, there's not the concept of racism or xenophobia, which means fear of foreigners, that we would understand, and that's the way we would define it today. The problem wasn't the fact that someone was of a different ethnicity or of a different nation or even a different culture. You see the story of Ruth as a Moabite coming from among the hostile nations, and we've just read the story of Rahab, the harlot from Jericho, who surrenders to God and so saves herself as well as her family. So, yeah, there were foreigners, and sometimes they're referred to in the passage, and you might have picked this out as sojourners who became believers.
Right.
But I think probably fair to say they were the rarity, and Israel, primarily he was out to displace the Baal worshipping Canaanites. God wanted and knew that only he could be God, because he knew he is and was and always will be the only true God.
Amen. And I think it's worth mentioning, John, that the foreigners actually obeyed Joshua during the Battle of Jericho. Well, I suppose, bringing up his story once again, on the other hand, Achan, who was an Israelite, he disobeyed and as a result had to die.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, foreigners themselves, they were not the problem. The threat to Israel, plain and simple, was sin. And most notably, infiltration by Baal worshippers, which brought down God's wrath every time. And if a stranger would choose to be a part of the people of Israel and join in this covenant with God, then they were most welcome. But it had to be done God's way, and that's not God being, what shall we say, a dictator. Far from it. God is a God of perfect love, and he'd seen time and time and time again people go their own way and it end in disaster. Look at the flood with Noah, where it got to the stage where people had gone their own way and there was only one good man left on earth. Such was the downward curve and spiral of sin. So God knew that if these Baal worshippers infiltrated, that this would happen, that they would go only one way. They were free to choose, make no mistake. But the terms of the covenant were there because God knew the way, the path to freedom, to peace, and to a life that was just so much better for them than their own choices would have yielded.
John, I actually think of what John chapter 6, verse 37 says. Jesus says, all that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will by no means cast out. And I think that beautifully ties into how God receives those who come to him with a heart of obedience to him and of love to him.
Yeah, I think, and that reminds me of another beautiful verse from the Bible where Jesus says, come to me all. Yeah. All's the key word, isn't it? Come to me all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. And so we need to have a real understanding of who God is. His Holy Spirit is a counselor, a divine counselor who helps us work through things, who strengthens us, who provides us with his fruit. What is the fruit of the Spirit? It's love, it's joy, it's peace, it's patience, it's kindness, it's goodness, it's faithfulness. And they are the qualities that make us feel alive and eternally alive, you know?
Look, there are so many great nuggets that we can take away from these chapters that we've read. So let's go ahead and move to the chapter summaries.
Yeah, so the theme, Esther, today was victory and deceit. Joshua chapter 8, we saw the Israelites able to take the minor city of Ai after they had disposed of the sin of Achan. And we saw that God had a much better battle strategy than did Joshua. It teaches us that God actually doesn't always do things the same way. Ai was taken by way of ambush, whilst Jericho was taken by the walls falling down. Afterwards, in chapter 9, then, the Gibeonites knew that they could not defeat Joshua, so they resort to trickery to obtain an amnesty. And Joshua, well, he didn't bother to consult the Lord about this, and ultimately was completely deceived into promising these enemies safekeeping. So what do we learn from that? Well, look, seek guidance from the Lord before making any major decision in your life, because situations are not always what they appear to be.
And it's on that encouraging note, dear friend, that we come to the end of today's episode of Mission 66. Look, but the conversation doesn't end here. We invite you to be a part of our online community by searching us on Facebook and on Instagram at Mission 66. That's Mission 66. And there you can leave your comment or your questions. And John and I would be most privileged to answer the questions that you have. So thank you so much for joining us for this study through the book of Joshua. And until next time, may God bless you.
As we close today's program, take a minute to download your free study guide. You'll be able to follow along every single day. Plus, you can engage with the reflection and application questions so you can apply the teaching to your life. It's a great companion resource to the audio Bible teaching of John Matthews and Esther Sisulu. To get your free study guide, visit mission66.org. That's mission66.org. You can also support the ministry of Mission 66 when you visit the site. Your gift makes it possible for this great teaching to be heard in many languages around the world. Mission 66 is a ministry of Transworld Radio in partnership with Dr. Luis Sayao.